Hello everyone. Tonight we meet right here, in this soft hour when the day has finally stopped demanding explanations from you. Outside, the world has lowered its voice. Inside, you're still awake, maybe scrolling, maybe staring at the ceiling, maybe wondering how something as small as money learned how to feel so heavy. You might be scared, but don't worry, everything will be alright. If your wallet is thin, your bank app is shy, or your coins sound lonely when they bump together, you're in good company tonight. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something strangely comforting about knowing other people are awake with you, quietly negotiating with their thoughts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin tonight's journey. You are walking through this story as yourself, not a hero, not a failure, just you. With empty pockets that whisper jokes at the worst possible moments. You open your jacket and feel air. No dramatic music, no thunder, just a polite absence. Your pockets don't scream, they murmur. They say things like, ah yes, cosmic timing again, or, interesting choice, universe, with the dry humor of someone who's been through this before. There's something oddly peaceful about nighttime poverty thoughts. During the day, fear has a loud voice. At night, fear lowers its tone and becomes philosophical. You notice that when you're tired enough, money stops being an emergency and turns into a question. Not, how will I survive? But, what is this trying to teach me? That question alone feels like progress, even if your rent doesn't agree yet. You sit somewhere familiar, a bed, a couch, maybe a chair that squeaks slightly when you shift your weight. The room smells faintly of detergent or old books or the ghost of coffee from earlier. Your phone screen glows like a tiny moon. You think about how strange it is that numbers on a screen can decide whether you feel safe. Historians still debate whether money has always controlled human emotions or if humans generously handed it that job out of convenience. Here's a little known fact you might enjoy as you sink deeper into this moment. Your brain processes financial stress in a similar region as physical pain. No wonder your shoulders ache when bills arrive. No wonder your jaw tightens when you check balances. The body, loyal and dramatic, assumes you're being chased by a tiger named overdraft. And yet, tonight, there is no tiger, only quiet, only you, only the whispering pockets, which, if you listen carefully, aren't mocking you at all. They're telling jokes to keep you calm. Bad jokes, admittedly, the kind where the punchline arrives late and slightly confused. Cosmic timing humor is like that. You don't laugh because it's funny, you laugh because resisting it is exhausting. You remember a true story you once heard. Maybe from a friend, maybe from a late-night video exactly like this. A woman with crushing debt decided to stop panicking every night. Not stop paying attention, just stop panicking. She imagined her money problems as slow-moving clouds instead of walls. Nothing changed immediately. In fact, for months, nothing changed at all. Then, without drama, opportunities aligned. A refund she didn't expect. A job offer that fit instead of drained her. She swore the biggest shift wasn't the money. It was the moment she stopped treating herself like a failure in the meantime. You're not claiming magic here. No fireworks, just timing. Historians still debate whether the law of attraction changes reality or simply trains the mind to notice exits it previously ignored. Either way, exits matter. You stretch slightly, maybe crack your neck, and feel the strange comfort of being alive and uncertain. You joke internally, if the universe wanted me relaxed, it could have sent rent money instead. The universe, apparently busy, sends you a yawn. Fair enough. Night has a way of making long-term problems feel temporarily negotiable. Your breath slows. The room feels less judgmental. You realize fear hates being observed calmly. Fear prefers drama. When you watch it gently, it starts telling jokes too. Awkward ones. It says things like, well, at least you're building character. Which you immediately reject because character doesn't pay utilities, but you smile anyway. Another little fact slips in quietly. Studies show people make better long-term decisions when slightly tired but calm, rather than alert and anxious. Maybe that's why so many realizations arrive just before sleep. The brain loosens its tie. You think again about those empty pockets. Remember them. Remember how they felt like proof of failure earlier today. Notice how now they feel like part of a story still unfolding. Same pockets, different tone. Repetition matters. Remember that alligator. Remember to use sunscreen. Memory works like that, looping meaning until it softens. This story doesn't rush you. It walks beside you. It lets you be broke without being broken. It lets you be afraid without letting fear drive. You're allowed to rest inside the uncertainty. You're allowed to believe, just a little, that timing might be awkward. Not cruel. And as the night deepens, you sense it. This isn't about money yet. It's about how you speak to yourself when the numbers are low. It's about learning to hear jokes instead of threats. Because somewhere between fear and sleep, between empty pockets and soft beginnings, something inside you has already started to pass. You wake up still inside the same story. Because nothing actually paused overnight. Morning light leaks in without asking permission. And you trudge along into your day carrying the same pockets. The same numbers. The same quiet concern that pretends to be practical advice. You tell yourself you're just being responsible. But responsibility has a sharp edge when it's fueled by fear. So you soften it. You let the fear walk beside you instead of riding on your shoulders like an unpaid landlord. As you move through familiar routines, brushing teeth, pouring coffee that's slightly weaker than you'd like because you're stretching it, you notice how scarcity talks. It doesn't shout first thing in the morning. It clears its throat. It says, just a reminder, and then proceeds to remind you of everything at once. You laugh softly, because even anxiety needs a sense of humor to survive. Joke number 1 of the day, you tell yourself you're on a minimalist lifestyle experiment. Curated by the universe. No refunds. Walking outside or staring through a window, you sense time differently. When money is tight, hours feel expensive, minutes feel like they should be productive. But today, you let a few of them wander off unsupervised. Historians still debate whether modern humans invented busyness to avoid listening to themselves. Or if listening simply fell out of fashion once calendars took over. Here's a little known fact that sneaks in as you breathe. People experiencing scarcity tend to tunnel their attention, focusing intensely on immediate problems while losing sight of long-term patterns. It's not a character flaw, it's biology. Knowing that doesn't solve your balance, but it does remove a layer of shame. You're not failing, you're responding. As you walk with nothing, no extra cash, no dramatic rescue plan, you remember a true story someone once told you about a man who lost nearly everything in a business collapse. Instead of obsessing, he started a strange habit. Every day, he imagined his future self thanking him for staying calm. Not rich, just calm. Months later, opportunities emerged that required clarity, not panic. He said the calm was the qualification. You test this idea quietly. Just for today, you decide to walk as if something is rearranging itself off stage. Not in a fantasy way, more like furniture being moved in the dark. You don't know where it's going, but you trust you won't trip over it forever. Joke number 2. You picture the universe bumping into a table and whispering, "Ow, sorry, didn't see that there." Your body responds first. Shoulders drop a fraction, jaw unclenches. Money hasn't arrived, but tension has departed briefly. Like a friend stepping out for air. You realize how often you've treated stress as motivation. You wonder what happens if you stop yelling at yourself and start narrating gently instead. The day continues. You pay attention to small things, the way light hits a wall, the sound of traffic like distant waves, the smell of something cooking somewhere you're not invited to. You feel poor, yes, but also oddly present. Presence is underrated currency. It doesn't buy groceries, but it buys perspective, which sometimes negotiates better deals later. Historians still debate whether ancient cultures saw poverty as fate or phase. Some believed timing was cyclical. Like seasons, winter wasn't a punishment, it was preparation. You like that thought. It doesn't excuse injustice, but it does offer breathing room. Another quiet fact, laughter, even forced at first, reduces cortisol levels measurably. Your nervous system doesn't care if the joke is good. It just cares that you smiled. Joke number 3 arrives when you realize your bank app now opens faster than ever, as if eager to show you nothing new. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. Remember how they whispered last night. They're still whispering now, but the tone has changed. Less sarcasm, more commentary. Interesting timing, they say, like critics at a rehearsal. You nod. You're rehearsing too. Rehearsing calm. This walking with nothing isn't heroic. It's slow. It's ordinary. It's choosing not to catastrophize every pause. You don't deny reality. You adjust your relationship to it. You let the story unfold at human speed, not panic speed. And somewhere between one step and the next, you realize this, you are not behind. You are between moments, between versions, between jokes the universe hasn't finished telling yet. The pockets stay empty, but the space inside you doesn't. You notice it sometime in the afternoon, when the day has lost its sharp edges and settled into a long exhale. The joke arrives quietly, not with laughter but with recognition. It's the moment when you realize the universe might not be laughing at you, but with you, and possibly a little nervously. You stand there, maybe waiting for something ordinary like a bus, a web page to load, or a reply that hasn't arrived yet. And your empty pockets whisper again. This time they sound almost playful. Ah, they say, so now you're paying attention to timing. You tilt your head, metaphorically speaking, and listen. There's no anger in the whisper, no threat, just commentary. You've spent so long assuming scarcity was a verdict that you forgot it could also be a punchline waiting for better delivery. Joke number 1 floats up. You imagine the universe checking its watch, shrugging, and saying, I had it ready earlier, but you were busy panicking. Your body reacts before your mind does. A small release, a half smile that surprises you. It's strange how humor can unlock places fear barricaded for years. You realize that when money feels late, you interpret it as rejection. But what if it's just late? Historians still debate whether humans are wired to interpret delay as danger, or whether that habit developed later, alongside deadlines and due dates. Here's a little-known fact that drifts in like background music. Anticipation activates the brain's reward system more strongly than reward itself. That means the waiting, uncomfortable as it is, holds more neurological energy than the arrival. No wonder the waiting feels so intense. You're practically glowing with unused expectation. You think of a true story you once read about a comedian who lived on almost nothing while trying to make it. He joked constantly about being broke, not to hide pain but to keep perspective. Years later, he said the jokes kept him from internalizing failure. When success came, he wasn't bitter, he was amused. The humor preserved him. You test this gently. You narrate your situation as if it's part of a cosmic sitcom. Not mocking yourself, just framing it lightly. In this episode, you think, the protagonist learns patience while eating creatively. Joke number 2 appears when you realize you've become very good at turning leftovers into philosophy. As evening approaches, timing becomes a theme everywhere. Traffic lights, microwave countdowns, the slow drip of notifications. You start seeing how much of life is waiting dressed up as action. And you wonder if abundance avoids frantic people simply because it can't get a word in. Historians still debate whether belief influences events or merely perception. But perception matters. If you see every delay as insult, you live in a hostile universe. If you see delay as misaligned timing, you live in a clumsy one. Clumsy feels safer. Another fact slides in softly. People who reframe stress as temporary show better problem-solving ability under pressure. Temporary. That word relaxes something in you. You whisper it internally like a secret password. You remember the pockets again. Remember them. Remember how they once felt like proof. Now they feel like commentary tracks. They whisper, too early, or, not yet, instead of, never. Joke number 3 lands when you think, at least the universe didn't ghost me, it's just running late. You sit with that. You let the idea of cosmic timing stretch out. Like a cat finding a warm spot. You don't demand answers. You let the joke exist without forcing laughter. Some jokes take time. Some punchlines arrive years later and suddenly make sense of everything before them. Nothing has changed on paper. But inside, something has shifted. You are no longer arguing with the pause. You are listening to it. And in that listening, fear loosens its grip, just enough for you to breathe normally again. The night waits ahead, patient and wide. Timing, you realize, isn't mocking you. It's inviting you to stay awake just long enough to hear the joke properly. You don't announce it to anyone, not even to yourself, but somewhere between one breath and the next. You begin the first quiet experiment. It's so small it almost doesn't qualify as an action. No vision boards, no affirmations shouted into mirrors. Just a decision to try one gentle thing and see if the universe notices. Or at least doesn't roll its eyes. The experiment is simple. For a few minutes each day, you will imagine money arriving without urgency attached to it. Not desperation, not pleading, just arrival, like a bus that is late but inevitable. You don't do this to control outcomes. You do it because panic has been exhausting. And curiosity feels lighter. You choose a moment when you're already still, maybe before sleep. Maybe during a pause that used to be filled with worry. You picture your future self sitting comfortably, not rich in a flashy way, just settled. That future version of you nods once, as if to say, yes, this worked out. No details, no numbers, just relief. Joke number 1 sneaks in when you realize how awkward this feels. You're not used to imagining calm outcomes. Your mind tries to interrupt with spreadsheets and worst-case scenarios. Like an accountant who refuses to clock out, you gently thank it and continue anyway. Historians still debate whether visualization practices originated as spiritual rituals or practical psychological tools disguised as mysticism. Either way, the brain doesn't seem to care. It responds to rehearsal, it prepares pathways. Here's a little known fact that makes you feel slightly more justified. When you imagine a scenario vividly, your brain activates similar neural networks as when you experience it. You're not pretending, you're training. That doesn't mean the universe owes you money. It means you're teaching your nervous system not to flinch at the idea of ease. The first few days feel pointless. Nothing happens. You still check your balance too often. You still do mental math at the grocery store like it's an Olympic sport. Joke number 2 arrives when you realize you've become extremely familiar with unit prices. As if knowledge itself might lower them. You nearly abandon the experiment out of boredom. But boredom, you notice, is quieter than fear. You decide to stay with it a little longer. A true story drifts into your thoughts. One you heard long ago. A man struggling with medical bills decided to stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What would calm look like right now?" He practiced visualizing bills being paid without tension, even when nothing changed externally. Months later, support appeared from unexpected places, payment plans, assistance programs, timing that aligned. He said the visualization didn't create money, it created clarity. And clarity attracted help. You don't romanticize this. You know effort matters, but you also know frantic effort burns out quickly. This experiment isn't about laziness. It's about alignment, whatever that means in practical terms. You sit again with the image of your future self. This time, you add one detail, a deep breath that feels natural. That's all. Your body responds immediately, as if relieved to be given permission. Shoulders soften, breath deepens. The experiment is working, not on money, but on you. Historians still debate whether ancient philosophers viewed wealth as moral reward or neutral tool. Some schools believed peace came from wanting less, others believed peace came from trusting flow. You suspect the truth lives somewhere in between. Sipping tea, waiting for humans to stop arguing long enough to notice it. Another small fact settles in. People who practice calm visualization show reduced stress hormones even when circumstances remain difficult. Your body doesn't need guarantees. It needs signals. Days pass. You repeat the experiment. Sometimes you forget. Sometimes you remember late and do it half-heartedly. That counts too. This isn't a performance review. It's a conversation. Joke number 3 appears when you catch yourself imagining abundance while wearing old pajamas and mismatched socks. You think, if this works, I owe the universe an apology for doubting it dressed like this. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. Remember how they once felt like accusations. Now they feel like props in an experiment. Variables, not verdicts. Nothing dramatic happens yet. No surprise deposit. No lottery ticket wins. But something subtle shifts. You stop bracing every time you think about money. The thought no longer triggers immediate tension. It feels neutral. That neutrality is new. You realize the experiment was never about forcing belief. It was about removing resistance long enough to see clearly. You're not demanding the universe move faster. You're asking yourself to stop pushing against the pause. As night returns, you settle into this new habit like a familiar chair. You don't expect results. You expect practice. And practice, you're learning, is how timing slowly begins to cooperate, not because it's impressed, but because you've finally stopped shouting over it. You don't notice the shift right away. It happens quietly, the way dust settles when no one is stomping around. One afternoon blends into the next. And suddenly you realize you're no longer arguing with reality every time money crosses your mind. The experiment from before is still there, humming softly in the background. But now something new joins it, perspective borrowed from someone else's life. You remember a true story, this one clearer than the others. A woman you once followed online, or maybe heard about through a friend of a friend, who documented her slow climb out of debt. Not a viral success story. No dramatic, 6 figures in 6 months, nonsense. Just honesty. She wrote about being so broke that she avoided opening emails, convinced each one was a trap. Instead of forcing positivity, she did something oddly gentle. She started treating money conversations like weather reports. Neutral, observational. It's tight today, she'd say, the way one might say, it's cloudy. That change alone altered everything. She stopped attaching identity to numbers. Opportunities followed, not instantly, but steadily. A better job fit, reduced interest rates after calm conversations. She later said the biggest win wasn't the money, it was realizing she wasn't being punished. She was just passing through a phase. You hold on to that phrase. Passing through. Historians still debate whether societies that emphasize fate create calmer citizens, or whether calm citizens simply invent gentler explanations. Either way, explanation matters. The story you tell yourself determines how heavy each step feels. You test this idea in your own mind. Instead of saying, "I'm bad with money," you say, "Money is quiet right now." Joke number 1 arrives when you imagine money tiptoeing around, afraid to wake you before it's ready. You decide that's acceptable behavior. Here's a little known fact that sneaks in while you're distracted. People who externalize problems, seeing them as temporary states rather than personal flaws, recover faster emotionally and practically. Your brain likes labels, but it prefers removable ones. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. Remember how they once hissed with judgment. Now they mostly comment like bored narrators. Still empty, they say, but you're calmer about it. You nod. Progress isn't always visible, sometimes it's audible. As days continue, you find yourself less reactive. You still care, you still plan, but panic has lost its microphone. Joke number 2 surfaces when you catch yourself opening your bank app without bracing for impact. Like someone touching a cold doorknob without flinching. You walk through routines with a slightly wider lens. You notice how many people carry invisible burdens. How many smiles are rehearsed. How many jokes hide anxiety. It makes you kinder to them and to yourself. Kindness, you suspect, is a form of wealth nobody teaches in school because it doesn't fit on spreadsheets. Another thought drifts in. Historians still debate whether communal support systems historically reduced individual stress, or if stress simply redistributed itself. You wonder what modern loneliness costs people financially, emotionally, physically. You don't solve it tonight. You just notice. Your experiment evolves. You no longer visualize outcomes daily. Sometimes you just sit with uncertainty without fighting it. That feels radical. The urge to control everything has softened. You realize how exhausting control was, especially when it didn't work. A small joke, number 3, arrives when you think, if letting go is this effective, I should have tried it before spreadsheets. You forgive yourself for not knowing sooner. Everyone learns timing late. That's part of the lesson. You hear the storyteller's voice now. Quieter but clearer. It sounds suspiciously like your own. But wiser, less rushed. It doesn't say, everything will be fine. It says, everything moves. That feels more honest, more believable. Another subtle fact. Humans perceive time as slower during stress and faster during calm. Maybe nothing external has changed much. Maybe you're just no longer stretching every minute into a threat. That alone feels like relief. You sit one evening and reflect without spiraling. That's new. You think about how fear once filled every gap. How it narrated silence as danger. Now silence feels like space. Space feels like possibility. Remember the empty pockets. Remember how they used to define the day. Now they're just part of the scene. Like background props. Important, yes, but not the main character. The main character is awareness, the one watching, learning, adjusting. You don't pretend this is the end. You don't claim victory. You acknowledge the middle. The middle is underrated. Movies skip it. Life lives there. As night returns again, familiar and patient, you sense something aligning, not money yet. Not outcomes, but attitude. And attitude, you're beginning to see, is the doorway timing uses to enter quietly. You reach a strange plateau where nothing improves and nothing collapses. It's an uncomfortable calm, like waiting in a quiet room where you're not sure if the appointment was cancelled or simply delayed. This is the part most people abandon. Not because it's painful, but because it's boring. You realize how addicted fear made you to urgency. Without it, you feel almost idle. You practice waiting without forcing. Not giving up, not surrendering goals. Just loosening your grip enough to stop shaking the door. You move through days with the same responsibilities. But you no longer push outcomes like furniture that won't budge. You let them sit. This is harder than struggling. Struggle gives you something to do. Historians still debate whether ancient spiritual traditions valued patience because it was morally superior, or because it was the only practical response in slow-moving societies. Either way, patience was once considered a skill, not a personality trait. You like that? Skills can be practiced. A little-known fact floats in while you wait. When people stop obsessively monitoring progress, performance often improves. It's called the quiet eye effect, focus without tension. Athletes use it. Musicians rely on it, apparently. So do people trying to survive on tight budgets without losing their minds. You think of a true story you heard about a woman stuck in a career deadlock. She kept applying, pushing, refreshing inboxes until she burned out. One day, she stopped, not forever, just temporarily. She focused on calm routines. 3 weeks later, someone she hadn't contacted in years reached out with an opportunity. She swore the pause was the turning point. Not magic, timing. You feel that pause now. You don't celebrate it, you sit inside it. Joke number 1 sneaks in when you think, if this is the universe testing my patience, it's using the long version. The waiting changes your body. Sleep deepens slightly. Thoughts slow. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios before breakfast. You still plan, but you don't obsess. Obsession was loud. Planning is quiet. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. They're still empty, but they no longer demand explanation every hour. They've become background noise. Like a clock you stopped hearing once you accepted it wasn't going to stop ticking just because you glared at it. Another fact slips in. Cortisol decreases when uncertainty is accepted rather than resisted. Your nervous system prefers known unknowns to imagined catastrophes. You realize how much energy fear consumed just by speculating. Historians still debate whether progress happens because of pressure or despite it. You suspect both, but pressure without rest breaks things. You've been broken before, you choose differently now. Joke number 2 arrives when you realize you're less interested in checking your balance than checking your breath. That feels suspiciously like growth, though you don't want to brag and scare it away. You fill time differently. You notice textures, sounds, pauses in conversations. You let silences exist without stuffing them with worry. Silence, you discover, isn't empty, it's spacious. Another true story floats up, this one quieter. A man caring for an ill parent while drowning in bills decided to stop measuring progress weekly and switched to monthly reflections. That small shift reduced his panic enough to think clearly. Solutions emerged, not miracles, but options. He said waiting without forcing gave his mind room to breathe. You breathe now, deliberately. The room feels larger. Time feels slower but kinder. You're not stalled, you're settling. Joke number 3 arrives when you think, if patience had a loyalty card, I'd be earning points right now. You smile and let that be enough. You understand something important. Forcing timing doesn't speed it up. It distorts it. You've been bending yourself around outcomes instead of letting outcomes approach naturally. This waiting isn't passive. It's strategic softness. You don't know what comes next. That's the point. You're learning to stand inside uncertainty without collapsing into it. You're learning that timing isn't persuaded by fear, but it responds to readiness. As evening falls, you feel oddly prepared, not for a specific event, but for whatever arrives. You're no longer chasing the moment. You're allowing it to find you. Something curious happens when you stop forcing outcomes. Your mind starts wandering into places it never had time for before. Not fantasies, observations, connections, strange little facts that arrive uninvited and make themselves comfortable. You find yourself thinking about timing in a broader way. Less personal, more human. You notice how time feels elastic. 10 minutes of waiting for money feels longer than an entire evening spent laughing with someone you trust. Historians still debate whether time itself is perceived differently during hardship, or whether hardship simply stretches awareness until every second feels examined under a microscope. Either way, your experience confirms it. Fear dilates time. Here's a little-known fact that lands softly. Neuroscientists have found that when people feel financially secure, even briefly, their perception of time becomes more future-oriented. They plan, they imagine. When they feel insecure, time collapses into the present moment. Everything becomes, now. No wonder debt feels suffocating. It steals tomorrow. You sit with that realization. You haven't stolen tomorrow back yet, but you've loosened its chains. The waiting you practiced earlier has quietly reopened the future. You can feel it, not as certainty, but as space. A true story comes to mind. One that doesn't get shared often because it's too subtle for headlines. A librarian who lived paycheck to paycheck began practicing something she called temporal kindness. Whenever she felt stressed about money, she reminded herself that future versions of her had survived worse. She imagined them reaching backward, offering reassurance. Over time, her decisions improved. She negotiated better. She rested more. She later said her finances changed only after her relationship with time softened. You like that idea? Time is something you can be kind to, instead of something you fight. Joke number 1 appears when you imagine apologizing to time for all the yelling you've done over the years. Sorry, you say internally. I thought you were ignoring me. Turns out you just don't like being rushed. You begin noticing patterns everywhere. Plants don't hurry. Seasons don't panic. Even traffic lights, annoying as they are, obey timing rather than preference. Historians still debate whether ancient societies trusted natural cycles more because they had fewer illusions of control. You wonder if modern stress is simply the cost of believing everything should respond instantly. Another small fact drifts in. People who practice delayed gratification don't just gain better outcomes, they report lower anxiety during the delay itself. The benefit isn't just later, it's now. That surprises you. You always assumed waiting was the price you paid for rewards. Maybe waiting is part of the reward. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. They're still there, still honest, still empty. But now they feel like placeholders rather than warnings. They're saying, not yet, instead of, never. That difference is enormous. Joke number 2 sneaks in when you think, if patience is wealth, I'm diversified now. You don't fully believe it, but it feels comforting to say. Your thoughts slow further. You stop narrating failure. You stop rehearsing explanations for things that haven't happened yet. The mind, given rest, becomes less dramatic. You realize how much of your exhaustion came from constant forecasting. Another true story surfaces, a student overwhelmed by loans who stopped obsessively calculating interest and instead focused on steady habits, sleep, routine, calm budgeting. Years later, she said the numbers improved only after her nervous system did. Stability invited opportunity. Historians still debate whether prosperity follows confidence or creates it. You suspect it's circular, like breathing. You inhale calm, you exhale clarity, you inhale patience, you exhale better timing. Joke number 3 arrives when you catch yourself enjoying a moment without checking the time. You think, this must be what abundance feels like in preview mode. Night settles again, familiar now. You feel less hunted by the clock. You realize something important. Timing isn't against you. It's not testing you. It's teaching you how to wait without disappearing. And in that lesson, quietly unfolding, the future stretches open, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough for you to step into it when the moment finally arrives. You don't plan it, but laughter begins to appear more often, like a stray cat that realizes you're not going to chase it away. It slips into moments that used to feel tense. Not loud laughter, soft, private amusement, the kind that barely moves your chest but changes your breathing. You realize humor has become a form of currency, and somehow, it's spending itself wisely. When fear tries to start its old routine, listing expenses, predicting disaster, you interrupt it gently. You add a punchline. Yes, you think, that would be terrible, and also very on brand for my current season. Joke number 1 lands quietly, disarming the spiral before it gathers speed. Historians still debate whether humor evolved as a survival mechanism or a social glue. You suspect it's both. It keeps the mind flexible. It reminds you that situations, no matter how serious, are still temporary scenes in a longer narrative. Here's a little-known fact that arrives with surprising warmth. Laughter activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for rest and repair. It tells your body you're safe enough to relax. Money stress may be intellectual, but relief is physical. Your body doesn't need a solution to rest, it needs permission. A true story surfaces. This one almost silly. A man drowning in debt started a habit of joking about his situation, not self-hate jokes, but observational ones. He treated his financial life like a sitcom. He said it prevented despair. Over time, his mood improved, and with it, his choices. He negotiated better, noticed opportunities, and eventually stabilized. Humor didn't pay the bills directly, but it kept him functional long enough to pay attention. You feel that now. You're still responsible, still realistic, but you're not grim. Grimness used to feel mature, now it feels inefficient. You're learning that lightness isn't denial, it's resilience. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them, they've become part of the joke. They whisper lines like, we're minimalist by design, or, less clutter, more character. You roll your eyes affectionately. They're trying. Joke number 2 appears when you realize you've stopped apologizing internally for not having everything figured out. You think, if clarity were required before living, nobody would leave bed. That feels accurate. Another fact slips in quietly. People who maintain humor during stress show better long-term coping outcomes. Even when external conditions are harsh, humor doesn't fix circumstances, but it changes how the brain searches for solutions. A relaxed mind sees options a tense one misses. Historians still debate whether ancient storytellers used humor to transmit wisdom because people remembered it better. You're starting to think the universe uses jokes the same way, slipping lessons in when you're not guarded. You catch yourself smiling at something trivial, a noise outside, a typo, a thought that went nowhere. You don't question it, you let it happen. The day feels less heavy. Time moves normally again. Joke number 3 arrives when you imagine abundance as shy, approaching only when it hears laughter. You picture it peeking around corners, waiting for the room to feel less tense before entering. Absurd, yes. Calming, also yes. Another true story drifts in. A woman facing chronic illness and financial strain began using humor to reclaim agency. She joked about her body, her bills, her bad days, not cruelly, kindly. She said humor reminded her she was more than her problems. Her condition didn't vanish, but her life expanded around it. You sit with that. Expansion doesn't require immediate improvement. It requires room. The night grows deeper. You feel lighter, not because things are fixed, but because you're no longer fighting them with clenched teeth. Humor has opened windows where walls used to be. Historians still debate whether joy is a luxury or a necessity. Tonight, you decide it's necessary. Not loud joy, gentle joy, the kind that keeps you awake just long enough to realize you're okay. And as you settle into this new rhythm, you understand, laughter didn't make your pockets fuller, but it made your steps steadier, and steady steps, over time, change where you end up. You begin to notice it in your body before you admit it in words. The money thoughts don't just live in your head, they've been renting space in your shoulders, your stomach, your jaw. When finances tighten, your body tightens too, as if preparing for impact that never quite arrives. Tonight, you finally connect the dots. Money has been speaking through your muscles. You pause mid-evening, maybe while washing dishes or sitting on the edge of the bed. And you scan yourself gently. The neck is stiff, the breath shallow, the stomach alert, like it's expecting bad news. You don't judge it, you greet it. You think, so this is where the conversation moved. Historians still debate whether ancient healers understood the mind-body connection intuitively, or whether modern science is simply rediscovering old wisdom with new language. Either way, your experience is unmistakable. Fear doesn't stay abstract. It settles in. Here's a little-known fact that arrives quietly, like a note slipped under a door. Chronic financial stress has been shown to increase inflammation markers in the body. Not because money is poisonous, but because prolonged vigilance is. The body wasn't designed to be on alert indefinitely. It needs reassurance, not spreadsheets. You test something small. When a money worry arises, instead of arguing with it, you relax one muscle, just one. Your shoulders drop a fraction. Your breath deepens by accident. The worry doesn't vanish, but it loses volume. Joke number 1 slips in when you think, apparently my trapezius muscles have been doing my budgeting. A true story surfaces, this one tender. A man dealing with both medical issues and crushing debt decided to focus on physical calm first. Not positivity, calm. He practiced slow breathing whenever fear spiked. Over months, his health stabilized enough to think clearly. He found resources he'd missed before. He later said healing his body gave his mind enough room to negotiate with reality. You don't romanticize illness, you respect it, but you also notice how fear multiplies symptoms. When you calm the nervous system, the body stops shouting. That doesn't cure everything, but it changes the volume. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them, tonight. They feel connected to your ribs, your breath, your heartbeat. Money isn't just a concept, it's a sensation. You decide to treat it like one. Gently, with curiosity. Joke number 2 arrives when you realize you've been clenching your teeth over imaginary future bills. You loosen your jaw and think, if stress burned calories, I'd be thriving. You smile, and your face muscles relax in response, grateful for the break. Another fact slips in. Slow breathing stimulates the vagus nerve, which signals safety throughout the body. Safety doesn't mean luxury, it means survival without panic. Your body accepts that definition gladly. Historians still debate whether wellness practices were historically reserved for the wealthy, or whether wealth itself once included wellness by default. You wonder how many financial systems quietly rely on people being too stressed to question them. You don't solve that tonight. You just notice how radical rest can feel. You sit or lie down and place a hand on your chest or stomach. You breathe as if explaining things to a frightened animal. You don't promise riches, you promise presence. The body listens. Another true story arrives, this one almost ordinary. A woman juggling 2 jobs and chronic fatigue stopped ignoring her body's signals. She adjusted her schedule slightly, protected sleep, reduced self-criticism. Within a year, her health improved enough to pursue better opportunities. She said listening to her body felt like learning a new language, one she'd been silencing for years. You feel that language now. It's slow, it's repetitive. It doesn't care about deadlines. It cares about rhythm. You realize how often you've overridden it in the name of productivity. Productivity, you now suspect, is overrated without sustainability. Joke number 3 drifts in when you think, my body and my bank account are both asking for gentler management. You nod in agreement, that feels fair. The night grows quieter, your breathing evens out, money worries still exist, but they no longer dominate every cell. You're learning that calm is not a luxury, it's a prerequisite for problem solving. Historians still debate whether humans evolved to endure long-term stress or short bursts of danger. Your nervous system votes clearly for the second. You listen. You understand something important now. When health joins the conversation, it changes the terms. You can't bully your way into abundance. You can't heal by scolding yourself. You must cooperate, with timing, with the body, with the moment. As you settle deeper into rest, you feel a subtle shift. Not victory, not resolution, alignment. Your body feels included again. And when the body feels included, fear loses its authority. You drift toward sleep or deeper stillness with one quiet realization. Money will come and go. But your body carries you through every season. Treating it kindly isn't optional, it's foundational. You find yourself thinking more broadly now, not just about your own experience, but about the long conversation humans have been having with belief for centuries. Somewhere between breathing exercises and gentle humor, your mind drifts into quieter questions. Not anxious ones, curious ones. The kind that don't demand answers immediately. You wonder, does belief actually shape outcomes? Or does it simply change how outcomes are experienced? Historians still debate whether prosperity follows belief, or belief follows prosperity. Some argue confidence attracts opportunity, others insist opportunity breeds confidence. You suspect it's less linear than either camp admits. Here's a little-known fact that settles in gently. Studies in psychology suggest that belief systems influence decision-making more than external events themselves. Two people can face identical circumstances and take completely different paths, based largely on what they believe is possible. Belief doesn't bend reality, but it bends behavior. Behavior, over time, bends reality just enough to matter. You sit with that thought. It removes pressure. You're not responsible for controlling the universe. You're responsible for steering yourself. That feels manageable. A true story rises up, one told in academic circles but rarely in casual conversation. A group of researchers tracked individuals emerging from long-term unemployment. The strongest predictor of recovery wasn't education or savings, it was whether participants believed their situation was temporary. Those who saw hardship as a phase navigated opportunities with more flexibility. Those who saw it as identity struggled longer. You absorb this without judgment. Joke number 1 appears when you think, so optimism isn't delusion, it's a time-saving device. You smile and let that land. You notice how debates themselves can be calming when they don't demand allegiance. You don't need to pick a side between science and mysticism. You can stand in the overlap. You can say, I don't know, without feeling defeated. Historians still debate whether ancient philosophers truly believed in fate or simply used it as comfort during uncertainty. You imagine them arguing politely under candlelight. Each convinced, each human. The image relaxes you. Another fact slips in quietly. Ambiguity tolerance, the ability to live with unanswered questions, is linked to lower stress and better long-term planning. You realize how often you've mistaken certainty for safety. Certainty, you now see, can be rigid. Safety can be flexible. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. They're still part of the equation. But now they feel like data. Not destiny. Information. Not indictment. Joke number 2 arrives when you think, if belief really controls everything, I'd have accidentally manifested a nap by now. You chuckle softly. You're human. Belief isn't a switch, it's a habit. You reflect on how many systems, financial, educational, social, quietly rely on people blaming themselves. If hardship is personal failure, the system remains unquestioned. You don't get angry about this tonight. You simply notice. Awareness is enough for now. Another true story surfaces. A man raised in constant scarcity was taught that struggle was noble. When his circumstances improved, he felt guilty relaxing. Only after questioning that belief did his finances stabilize. He said letting go of struggle felt more radical than earning money. You feel that resonance. You've been loyal to fear longer than it deserved. You're learning to renegotiate that contract. Historians still debate whether belief is inherited culturally or chosen individually. Probably both. You didn't choose your early lessons, but you can revise them. Revision isn't betrayal, it's growth. Joke number 3 arrives when you think, if doubt counts as curiosity, I'm doing great. You allow yourself that credit. The night deepens again. Your thoughts grow slower. rounder, less sharp. You're no longer seeking proof. You're seeking peace. Peace, you realize, doesn't require certainty. It requires enough trust to rest. You don't resolve the debate tonight. You don't need to. You simply step back into your own experience. Grounded and awake. Belief isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about choosing a lens that doesn't exhaust you. As you settle into stillness, you feel the debate fade into background hum. What remains is you, breathing, listening, quietly learning how to move forward without needing all the answers first. You don't go looking for another example, but it finds you anyway, slipping into your thoughts the way certain memories do when you're finally quiet enough to receive them. This one belongs to someone you never met, yet somehow recognize. Another life, another set of worries, another slow turning of the wheel. He was stuck for years. Not dramatically, just persistently. The kind of stuck that doesn't make headlines. Same apartment, same job that barely covered expenses. Same feeling that life was happening elsewhere. He didn't describe himself as unhappy, just permanently postponed. When money was tight, which was often, he worked harder. When that didn't help, he worked faster. When that failed, he blamed himself. The turning point wasn't a breakthrough. It was a release. One evening, exhausted, he stopped asking how to escape and started asking how to soften the experience of being there. That question changed everything. Historians still debate whether human progress comes from ambition or from adaptation. In his case, adaptation came first. He stopped measuring his worth by outcomes. He began treating each day as complete, even if it wasn't impressive. Here's a little-known fact that quietly reframes his story. People who reduce self-blame during hardship recover more effectively. Even when external constraints remain, self-blame narrows thinking, self-compassion widens it, wider thinking sees exits. He didn't quit his job. He didn't manifest sudden wealth. He changed one habit, when fear arose. He named it without feeding it. This is pressure, he'd say. This is uncertainty. Naming created distance. Distance created calm. Calm created room. Joke number 1 arrives when you imagine fear deflating slightly each time it's labeled. Like a balloon slowly losing air. Not dramatic, just less loud. Months passed. Nothing spectacular happened, until something did. A conversation he nearly skipped led to an opportunity. Not perfect, not glamorous, just better aligned. He later said the opportunity existed before. He simply hadn't been able to see it through panic. You recognize this pattern now. You've been practicing it yourself. Without calling it anything, you're less reactive, less urgent, more available. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. They've been with you through all of this. They're still empty, but they feel less accusatory. They've become witnesses instead of judges. Joke number 2 slips in when you think. At least emptiness is consistent. You smile. Consistency is underrated. Another fact drifts in. Cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift perspective, is one of the strongest predictors of resilience. Flexibility doesn't remove obstacles. It changes how you approach them. You're becoming more flexible without trying to be. Historians still debate whether resilience is taught through hardship or modeled through example. You suspect both. That man's story didn't teach you what to do. It showed you what was possible. You notice something subtle tonight. You're no longer waiting to be rescued by a future version of yourself. You're cooperating with the present one. That feels quieter, more sustainable. Joke number 3 appears when you realize you've stopped giving motivational speeches to yourself in the mirror. You think, good, those were exhausting. Now you offer yourself silence instead. Another true detail from his story surfaces, when his finances improved. He didn't feel triumphant, he felt relieved. Relief, he said, was better than excitement. Excitement fades, relief settles. You like that? You're not chasing euphoria, you're learning to value ease. The night wraps around you gently. You feel grounded in this story, not because it promises outcomes, but because it confirms patterns. Let go of force, soften resistance, stay present long enough to notice openings. Historians still debate whether fate favors the prepared or the relaxed. You're starting to believe it prefers those who are both. You breathe slowly. You don't rush conclusions. You let the story of that other life blend with yours. Different details, same rhythm. And in that rhythm, you sense it again, the subtle turning. Not a dramatic reversal, just a shift in direction. So gentle you might miss it if you weren't paying attention. You are paying attention now. You sit with the idea that delay might not be refusal. It's a simple thought, but it changes the temperature of the room when you let it in. Delay as rearrangement. Delay as preparation. Delay as timing catching its breath. You've heard these phrases before. maybe rolled your eyes at them. But tonight they land differently. Not as slogans, more like observations. You think about how often you assumed, not yet, meant, never. Historians still debate whether humans are wired to fear absence more than loss. Loss is clear. Absence is ambiguous. Ambiguity invites imagination, and imagination, when stressed, tends to choose the worst option. Here's a little-known fact that softens that tendency. The brain's default mode network becomes less anxious when given neutral explanations for uncertainty. Not optimistic ones. Neutral, "I don't know yet," is more calming than, "this is bad." You feel that truth settle gently. You test it. A familiar worry appears. Instead of answering it with reassurance or panic, you respond, "Not yet, nothing more." The worry pauses. Confused. It was expecting a fight. Joke number 1 drifts in when you imagine your anxiety checking its notes and saying, "That's not how this usually goes." A true story arrives, one you didn't fully understand before. A small business owner struggled for years, applying for loans that were repeatedly delayed or denied. Instead of interpreting each delay as rejection, she treated them as incomplete conversations. She adjusted slowly. When funding finally arrived, it fit better than what she originally asked for. She later said the waiting saved her from scaling something fragile too early. You sit with that, timing as protection, not punishment. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them, tonight. They feel like placeholders, spaces waiting to be filled when conditions align. That feels less cruel than your earlier interpretations. Another fact slides in quietly. People who interpret setbacks as feedback rather than failure maintain motivation longer. Feedback invites adjustment. Failure invites shame. Shame drains energy faster than effort ever could. Historians still debate whether progress is linear or cyclical. You suspect it's spiral-shaped, returning to familiar points with slightly different understanding each time. You've returned to emptiness many times. This time, it feels different. Joke number 2 arrives when you think, "If the universe wanted me to rush, it would have given clearer instructions." You smile. Ambiguity, you realize, might be intentional. You allow the idea that things are rearranging off stage again. Furniture moving quietly in the dark. You don't need to see it to trust it's happening. You've learned what pushing doors feels like. This is different. Another true story floats in, this one about health. A woman waiting months for a diagnosis felt her life on pause. When results finally came, the delay had allowed her body to stabilize enough to handle treatment better. She said waiting felt unbearable until she saw its purpose. Then it felt kind. You breathe with that. Purpose often arrives late. That doesn't mean it wasn't there all along. Historians still debate whether meaning is discovered or assigned. You're assigning some now, gently, without forcing conclusions. Joke number 3 appears when you realize you've become comfortable saying, "I don't know yet," out loud. You think, this must be what maturity sounds like. The night stretches. You feel less urgency, less pressure to resolve everything. You don't demand clarity before resting. You let rearrangement continue unseen. You sense something important. Delay has given you skills, patience, observation, humor, compassion, that immediate success might have skipped entirely. You wouldn't choose the struggle again, but you acknowledge its contribution. You're no longer waiting against time. You're waiting with it. That partnership feels new. It feels sustainable. As you settle deeper, you realize something profound in its simplicity. Delay didn't stop your life. It shaped how you lived it. And that shape, gentler, wider, calmer, is something you'll carry forward, regardless of when outcomes arrive. You find yourself circling back to familiar images, not because you're stuck, but because repetition has softened them. The empty pockets return again, as they always do, but now they arrive like old acquaintances rather than unwelcome evidence. You know them, you've learned their language, they don't startle you anymore. Remember the empty pockets, remember how they once shouted verdicts, failure, lack, danger. Notice how now they speak more quietly, almost politely. Still here, they say, still part of the story. You nod. Stories need continuity. Even pauses have purpose. Historians still debate whether repetition is how humans learn or how they cope. You suspect it's both. Repetition turns fear into familiarity, and familiarity dulls its sharpest edges. Here's a little-known fact that fits perfectly into this moment. The brain reduces its stress response to repeated stimuli that don't result in harm. It's called habituation. Your nervous system is learning that thinking about money doesn't automatically equal danger. That learning is priceless. A true story surfaces, this one about someone who kept returning to the same obstacle for years. A writer who faced constant rejection, living modestly and uncertainly, decided to stop interpreting each rejection as new. "I've been here before," she'd say, "and I survived." Over time, the sting lessened, her work improved, one acceptance finally arrived, and she said the repetition taught her endurance more than the success ever could. You feel that endurance now. You don't celebrate emptiness, but you don't fear it either. Fear has lost its novelty. That's important. Joke number 1 appears when you think, if this were a movie, the empty pockets would be a recurring gag by now. You smile. Recurring gags lose their power to shock. You notice how your internal reactions have changed. Where once there was urgency, there is now observation. Where once there was judgment, there is curiosity. This is what growth looks like when it's quiet. Another fact slips in. People who practice reflective repetition, revisiting experiences with new interpretations, show increased emotional regulation. You're doing that naturally now, revisiting without rewounding. Historians still debate whether memory exists to preserve pain or to refine understanding. Tonight, memory feels like refinement. Joke number 2 arrives when you realize you've become strangely proud of how calmly you handle uncertainty. You think, I should put this on my resume, professional at waiting. The night feels deeper now, heavier in the good way. Your thoughts slow further. You no longer need to narrate everything. Silence feels like companionship. Another true story floats in, brief but resonant. A man who had cycled through financial boom and bust said the second time he lost everything, he suffered less, not because it hurt less, but because he trusted himself more. Experience had taught him that nothing was permanent, not even emptiness. You trust yourself more now, not because you have answers, but because you've proven you can stay present without unraveling. That's a skill no one advertises, but everyone needs. Joke number 3 arrives softly when you think, if calm were contagious, I'd finally be contributing to society. You let that humor warm you. You remember earlier sections, remember that alligator. Remember to use sunscreen. Memory works like that, looping lessons until they integrate. The empty pockets have looped through your life many times. This time, they're integrating. Historians still debate whether wisdom comes from age or attention. You suspect attention plays the larger role. You've been paying attention. You feel something settle, acceptance, not resignation. Acceptance doesn't mean stopping effort. It means stopping the fight against reality long enough to move intelligently within it. As the night deepens further, you realize repetition didn't trap you. It trained you. Each return to emptiness taught you something new, until emptiness itself stopped being the lesson and became the background. You breathe slowly, comfortably. You're no longer bracing for the next thought. You let it come or not come. That freedom feels like quiet wealth. Nothing dramatic changes, and yet everything does. That's the strange part. If someone looked at your life from the outside, they might struggle to point out the shift. Same routines, same responsibilities, same numbers, more or less. But inside, the atmosphere is different. The air feels lighter, like a room after a window has been opened without anyone making a fuss about it. You move through a day without bracing yourself. That's how you notice. You wake up and don't immediately calculate. You brush your teeth without rehearsing future explanations. You drink something warm and let it be warm. Not symbolic. This is new. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of constant commentary. Historians still debate whether inner change precedes outer change or merely prepares people to notice it. You suspect it does both. Quietly, without announcements. Here's a little-known fact that fits this moment perfectly. When people experience reduced internal stress, they often underestimate how much they've changed because the shift feels normal so quickly. The nervous system recalibrates and calls it baseline. Growth doesn't ring a bell. It just settles in. You catch yourself responding differently to small frustrations. A delay doesn't trigger a spiral. An unexpected expense doesn't feel like a personal insult. You still respond, but you don't react. That difference feels subtle and enormous at the same time. Joke number 1 arrives when you think, so this is what people mean by being fine. Not happy, not solved, just fine. You smile. Fine feels luxurious. A true story drifts in. This one almost invisible. A woman who spent years in financial anxiety said the strangest moment came when she realized she hadn't thought about money all morning. Nothing had improved yet, but she had. That absence of obsession felt like freedom. The improvements followed later, but the freedom came first. You recognize that freedom now. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's simply there, like a chair you didn't realize you'd been standing next to all along. You remember the empty pockets again. Remember them. They're still part of the story, but they no longer define the chapter. They're props, not plot. You've stopped asking them to explain your worth. Another fact slides in gently. Emotional regulation improves decision quality over time. Even without increased resources, calm doesn't replace money, but it multiplies whatever money eventually arrives. You file that away without urgency. Historians still debate whether contentment dulls ambition. You feel the opposite, without fear draining your energy. Ambition feels cleaner, less frantic. You want things, but you don't need them to arrive immediately to feel okay. Joke number 2 arrives when you realize you've stopped making deals with the universe in your head. If this works out, I'll finally relax. You think, I relaxed first. That was the trick. You laugh softly at yourself. Your inner world feels spacious now. Thoughts come and go without sticking. You're less interested in predicting outcomes. You're more interested in how you show up while waiting. That focus feels within reach. Another true story surfaces, someone who said, "Nothing changed externally for months after I changed internally. But when change came, I was ready to receive it instead of panicking about it." You understand that now. Readiness isn't about preparation, it's about openness. Historians still debate whether readiness can be taught or only experienced. You suspect it has to be lived. Joke number 3 appears when you think, if peace were taxable, I'd finally owe something. You enjoy the absurdity and let it pass. The night feels especially gentle now. You notice how your breathing has found its own rhythm. You're not forcing sleep, you're allowing rest to approach when it's ready. You realize this. Nothing changing is not the same as nothing happening. Something fundamental has shifted. You've stopped resisting the present moment. That resistance was the heaviest thing you carried. Externally, the world may still test you. Bills will arrive, delays will happen, but internally, you've learned how to stay. You've learned how to exist inside uncertainty without shrinking. As you settle deeper into stillness, you feel a quiet confidence, not in outcomes, but in yourself. You trust your ability to navigate whatever arrives. That trust is new. That trust is everything. And in this space, where nothing changes and everything does, you rest, not because the story is over, but because you finally feel safe inside it. You arrive at the quiet realization without fanfare. The way most important truths show up, unannounced, almost shy. There is only one storyteller here, and it has been speaking the entire time. Not the universe as a distant force, not money as a judge, not fear as an enemy. Just a voice, yours, learning how to narrate experience without cruelty. You see it clearly now. Every version of the story depended on who was telling it. When fear narrated, everything felt urgent and doomed. When humor narrated, everything felt temporary and oddly survivable. When patience took over, timing softened. Nothing external changed instantly, yet the meaning of everything shifted. Historians still debate whether humans invented stories to make sense of chaos or whether chaos exists because stories demand contrast. You don't resolve that tonight. You simply notice how powerful narration is. The same event, told differently, becomes a different life. Here's a little-known fact that fits perfectly into this final stretch. Research shows that people who frame their lives as coherent narratives, rather than a series of random failures, report greater well-being and resilience. Meaning doesn't require success, it requires continuity. You've created that continuity quietly, one gentle reframe at a time. You think back to the empty pockets again. Remember them, they were never the villain. They were a prompt, a pause, a moment where the storyteller had to decide what kind of tale this would be. You chose one with humor, with patience, with room to breathe. Joke number 1 arrives softly when you think, so all this time, the plot twist was me. You smile, it feels earned. A true story surfaces one last time, this one universal. Someone you've never met, somewhere you'll never visit, lay awake at night with the same worries you had. They didn't know the ending either. What carried them forward wasn't certainty, but kindness toward themselves while waiting. Their life didn't become perfect. It became livable. That was enough. You realize how often you waited for permission to relax. Permission to stop worrying. Permission to feel okay before things were okay. Tonight, you grant yourself that permission. No conditions attached. Historians still debate whether peace is found or practiced. You've practiced it here, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. That counts. Joke number 2 arrives when you think, if peace were a subscription, I'd finally remember to renew it. You breathe out a soft laugh and let it dissolve. The storyteller's voice grows quieter now, not because it's done, but because it trusts you. You don't need constant narration anymore. Silence feels safe. Gaps feel natural. You notice how your body rests more fully, how thoughts drift without hooks, how the future feels present without being demanding. This is not an ending. It's a settling. Joke number 3 arrives. Barely a whisper, Turns out, the universe wasn't late, I was just loud. You smile one last time. You understand now. Fear, money, time, they were never separate characters. They were tones, moods, inflections in the same voice. Change the voice, and the story changes with it. You don't promise yourself wealth. You don't promise ease forever. You promise narration with care. And that promise feels reliable. The night holds you gently. The story doesn't need to continue aloud. It can rest inside you now, unfolding at its own pace. Told kindly, moment by moment. Word count, 1.041. Conclusion. You don't rush away from this moment. You let it taper naturally. The way music fades when it has said enough. The room feels dimmer, quieter, kinder. Your breathing slows without instruction. Your shoulders sink into whatever is holding you. You no longer feel the need to check anything. Time, money, outcomes. Those things can wait. They've learned you don't respond well to shouting. They'll come back later, more politely. The storyteller inside you lowers its voice to a whisper now. Not because it's tired, but because it trusts the silence to carry meaning on its own. You've learned how to listen without panic. How to wait without disappearing. How to let empty pockets exist without letting them define you. You remember everything you've walked through tonight. But it no longer feels heavy. It feels integrated, like a path behind you, not a weight on your back. Nothing needs to be solved before sleep arrives. So you let your eyes close, or your thoughts drift, or your awareness soften, whatever feels right. You are safe enough for rest. You are allowed to pause. And as the final image fades, the quiet room, the calm breath, the gentle hum of the night, you hear it one last time. Barely audible, the kindest voice of all saying, "Don't be afraid. All difficulties will pass. There is only one storyteller, and tonight, it speaks softly." End of script. Good night.